Thank you, Gary. I am here with Dr. David Trim with ASTR, which is an acronym that I'm going to let him explain. David, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what is ASTR, and how does it contribute to what we're doing mission-wise for the church?
Happy to do that, Jeff, and welcome down here to the General Conference Archives. That's what the A stands for. The acronym stands for Archives, Statistics, and Research, A, S, T, and R. The General Conference Archives has been around for 40 years, more than 40 years now. The statistics has been around even longer. We've actually collected statistical reports to help our mission planning since 1865. So the statistical report, which is done annually, is almost as old as the church itself. The research has been added recently, and it's been added because if we want to reach the world, we need to understand the world, we need to understand the dynamics of our church, and we need to have good data on which to base important decisions.
Okay, now, people would not necessarily connect mission with archives and statistics. Tell us how you support the mission of the church.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. And I tell people, if the two most boring words in the English language, well, it would be probably archives and statistics. They're the words most likely to induce, people going to sleep.
Yep.
The statistics is absolutely vital because everything we do in mission planning, and you know about this in your position,
that's right,
is based on statistical data. If we don't have accurate understanding of what's going on in the church, how can we plan it? We have to know where the church is strong in order to plan to do better where it's weak. So statistical data is essential. But perhaps it hasn't always been used in a sophisticated and thoughtful way as it might have been. We're trying to do that now to empower our mission planning. Archives is important because, well, in general, and I would say this, I'm an historian, but it's true. If we don't know where we've come from, we don't know who we are or where we are, and we won't make as good decisions about where we're going.
Absolutely.
Archives also matter, though, because our church's mission, our church's history is based on stories. Empowering stories, inspiring stories, amazing stories. Some stories are things that went wrong, too. We have to know where we went wrong as well as what we did right. But those stories are something we in ASTR have a passion for sharing with our church members.
It's a perfect lead-in because you're going to share with us a story about a gentleman by the name of George Keough. And I haven't even heard the story yet, so I'm looking forward to it. Tell us the story.
George Keough, and this has to be brief, so it's not doing justice to it, a really amazing man, was born in Scotland. He grew up in Ireland in the Victorian era. He went as a missionary with his wife in 1908. He'd been inspired by stories of David Livingstone, and he said, I want to go to Africa. And then the brethren, as they said in those days, said to him, well, we're sending you to Egypt. And he said, well, I've volunteered to go to Africa. And he later remembered how they said to him, Egypt is in Africa. He was thinking of a rather different Africa. He went, and that was probably one of the greatest blessings. That mistake wasn't a mistake, it was God's providence. He served in Egypt until 1929. He served there 21 years. And he transformed the way Adventists did mission. Up until that point, they didn't try to reach the local people. If you can believe that.
Who were they reaching?
European and American expatriates. That's all they worked for. And he later recalled how he said, where do I learn Arabic? And they said, oh, you don't need to learn Arabic. We can't reach the local people anyway. To which he apparently responded, well, if you're not talking to them in their language, maybe maybe there's a connection there. So he learned Arabic, and he left Cairo. He didn't work in Cairo, Alexandria, the great cosmopolitan cities where people from all around the world work. And, we do want to reach people everywhere, but 90% of the people were Arabic-speaking Egyptians, and he wanted to reach them. So he left Cairo. He went 6 hours train ride up the Nile into a remote region, and he worked there. And he had baptisms, which you will know, and some of our viewers will know today, is still rare in the Middle East and among Muslim lands. He baptized 17 people in the space of 3 years. Well, in some parts of the world we'd say, so what? That's like the day of Pentecost. And indeed, a European church leader said, it's the second day of Pentecost. But he did it by going into people's homes, sitting on the dirt floors with them, and eating the food they prepared. He embodied Christ to them.
Incarnational.
That's incarnational mission. And I've had a very elderly Egyptian describe to me how his father was converted because he went to a local church. He'd been interested and he went to the local church, and it happened to be ordinances. And George Keough happened to be there. He was visiting the local church. They had foot washing, and he went down on his knees and washed that man's feet. Well, you might think so it should be. But in the 1920s, Europeans and Americans barely had contact with ordinary people. They did not wash their feet. He embodied Christ to those people. That's what made him amazing. But its story doesn't end there. He was called back to Europe. He taught at one of our church's colleges until 1935, and then he was sent back to be president of what was then called the Arabic Union Mission. He was responsible for that for nearly 7 years, during the time of World War II, when the Middle East was fought over by huge armies, and people were urging him, pull all our missionaries out. And he actually wrote to the General Conference Secretary, said, I'm not going to do that, because what would all our local people think if the missionaries left at the first sign of danger? I'm not going to do that. They stayed. The church suffered some difficulties, of course, because of the war, but he stayed. He later went to the seminary. He taught our future pastors and missionaries Islam and Arabic, a program that was decades ahead of its time. And then at the age of 65, when most people would retire, he went back to the Middle East, to the new Middle East division, as Voice of Prophecy director, to direct radio to reach all the people who otherwise wouldn't hear because missionaries couldn't reach them. So a man of 50 years experience, vision, passion, and absolute dedication.
That's so cool, because I actually was on the compound there in Beirut, Lebanon as a missionary kid, and I had no idea who this gentleman was my whole life, and the division building and everything, which most of that's not even there anymore, but pretty interesting stuff. Well, thank you, Dr. Trim, for being here with us today.
Pleasure, Jeff.
And it's just been, we look forward to hearing more of the stories that you have for us. For Mission 360, I'm Jeff Scoggins. Thank you for joining us this time.